Welcome to your deep dive. Today, some really big questions. Technology, religion, consciousness. You've given us quite a mix here. Philosophy, history, personal stories, even some AI research. Seems like you're wrestling with something a lot of us are thinking about. What does it even mean to be human now, with all these machines getting smarter and smarter? And can it actually offer us something, like spiritual meaning? In a world that feels, I don't know, kind of disenchanted?
It's a fascinating journey you've laid out, that's for sure. What strikes me right off the bat is how you start with your own story, your own experience of, well, religious disenchantment. You talk about moving away from a world full of spiritual meaning to one that's more mechanical.
Yeah, and you connected that to Max Weber, right? His whole idea of disenchantment, this loss of wonder. Like we've reduced everything to just cause and effect. Like the world's become this machine we just want to take apart.
Exactly. And that way of thinking, it's like it shows up everywhere, especially with this idea of the mind as machine. You bring up Descartes, he saw animals as just, well, complex machines.
Yeah.
And then there's Lemaitre, taking it even further, saying even the human brain, just a mechanical spring.
Wow. So we're just machines. That's a pretty wild thought when you really stop and think about it. And then this whole idea, it really takes off with cybernetics, right?
You got it. McCulloch, one of the pioneers in the field, he thought computation was this universal language. You could apply it to anything, even the human mind.
And then you add in Claude Shannon and his information theory. Information, all of a sudden, it's just math. It's like we took meaning, like subjective meaning, out of the equation. So here we are, disenchantment, the world's a machine.
Yeah.
And our minds, machines too. But where does AI fit into all of this?
And that is where things get really interesting. You bring in Alan Turing, the godfather of AI, and his what he called the theological objection. He argued that humans, we couldn't create a soul, not even with all our fancy machines.
So even as we're building these incredible machines, there's still this sense that we can't really replicate what it means to be human, at least not fully.
Right. And then you introduce Roddy Brooks and his idea of embodied intelligence. His approach to robotics, it's a real counterpoint. He's saying intelligence isn't just about calculations. It's about how you interact with the world. So his robots, Cog and Kismet, they're designed to learn through actually moving around, just like we do.
And this is where you share your own story about the Aibo robot dog and how you felt this connection with it, stronger than you expected. It really makes you think twice about how we define intelligence, doesn't it?
Brooks would say intelligence is in the eye of the observer. He's saying it's all about the interaction, the entity and its environment. It's not just what's going on inside, like the brain. It's about how that brain interacts with the world.
So a robot learning, adapting, could be intelligent in a way, even if it doesn't have a soul, like in the traditional sense. Maybe consciousness shows up in ways we don't expect. Not just in us, but maybe in other forms too.
That's a great point. And it takes us to the next part of your journey. Some really big ideas here. Panpsychism, idealism. It's like you're trying to re-enchant the world, bring consciousness back into the picture, into how we understand reality.
Yeah, I remember you talking about going to a conference, post-humanism, I think it was, and there's this physicist who just dismisses the whole search for meaning, calls it an illusion. That must have been a little jarring.
It definitely highlights the tension, right, between these totally different ways of seeing the world, a meaningless universe versus one where consciousness is everywhere.
And you start exploring panpsychism, which is basically consciousness is fundamental. It's in everything, not just us or animals.
Think of it like a spectrum. On one side, humans, complex thoughts, emotions. On the other, maybe a rock. Seems lifeless. But panpsychism says there's some level of super basic.
So it's not just a bunch of dead matter. There's some form of consciousness running through everything.
Wow. And then you jump into idealism, right? That's where things get even more out there. That's right. Idealism says reality is mental. Like the mind is the base of everything. You mentioned Bernardo Castro, his ideas. He says matter. It's just a tool, how our minds make sense of the world.
So instead of mind coming from matter, it's the other way around. Matter comes from mind. That's a whole different way of seeing things. And you're really wrestling with these ideas. Do they actually solve anything? Or just reframe the same old mysteries?
And it's at this point, your deep dive takes a sharp turn. We go from these big philosophical questions to something very real, very practical. Surveillance tech, predictive algorithms. It's like you're starting to worry about losing control in a world ruled by data.
It does sound a little ominous. We're moving from like heady philosophy to how technology is actually impacting us in our everyday lives.
Exactly. You described this feeling almost like paranoia. This sense of being controlled by forces you can't see. You even bring up the simulation hypothesis, that we're all living in a computer program made by some advanced civilization.
Yeah, that'll keep you up at night. It's a fascinating idea, but a little terrifying too, isn't it?
And this fear of being controlled, it just gets stronger with all this big data and predictive algorithms, right? To tell the story about your friend, algorithms literally predicted what she would do. It's kind of a chilling example of how data can be used to know, even manipulate our behavior.
So free will,
Yeah.
individual choice, are those even real in a world where data shapes so much of our lives? This is where things start to feel a little unsettling.
And that's where we'll pick up next time. We'll dive deeper into these anxieties, especially your concerns about black box technologies like deep learning. These complex systems, they might be creating inequalities. And we don't even really know how they work.
Definitely a lot to unpack there. Looking forward to going deeper. We'll have to save that for part 2 of this deep dive, though.
Welcome back to your deep dive into technology, religion, and consciousness. All these big ideas swirling around.
Last time we were talking about those predictive algorithms, that uneasy feeling of losing control in a world that's all about data.
And your exploration. It goes even deeper into this unsettling territory. You start talking about black box technologies. And you seem pretty worried about them.
Well, yeah, I mean, black boxes, it sounds kind of ominous, doesn't it? What are they exactly, and why are they so concerning?
They are, in a way. Think about deep learning algorithms. They're so complex that even the people who create them, they don't always fully get how they work, how they reach their conclusions.
So we're building these systems that can make decisions, predictions, even art, but we don't really understand why they make the choices they do.
Exactly. And that lack of understanding, it creates this unease, right? Like we're giving up control to these forces we can't even comprehend. You even describe it as a loss of meaning in a world that's overflowing with information.
It's like you know so much, there's all this data, but you still don't really get it, the underlying why.
You got it. You're not alone in feeling that way. It's a common sentiment in this age of big data. And then you start exploring the potential dangers, like algorithmic bias. You're worried that these systems, even if they're not designed to, they could make existing inequalities worse.
It's unsettling, right? Just because a machine makes a decision doesn't make it fair or objective. These algorithms, they learn from data that reflects our own biases. So of course they could end up amplifying those biases.
Exactly. And you point out something really interesting, the irony of demanding transparency. Sure, we want these systems to be explainable, but what if pushing for that just leads to even more surveillance? Even more data collection.
So we're stuck between wanting to understand these systems and being afraid of what might happen if they become too transparent. What a dilemma.
It is. It's a complex issue. No easy solutions. And then it gets even more complicated when you consider that we're relying on AI more and more for decision-making, even in life or death situations.
Now that's a scary thought. What kind of situations are we talking about here?
Think about healthcare, algorithms, diagnosing illnesses, or in the justice system, predicting if someone will commit a crime again, or even self-driving cars, making split-second decisions out on the road.
We're putting so much trust in these black boxes, giving them so much power. Even though we don't really know how they work, that's pretty unnerving.
It is, and you really hit on those ethical questions. Who's responsible when things go wrong? Is it fair? And what about those unintended consequences, the things we don't even anticipate?
Okay, so at this point in your deep dive, I have to admit, I'm feeling a little overwhelmed. Is there any hope here? What does the author suggest we do about all of this?
Well, they don't really offer a simple solution, a step-by-step guide. But there are some really valuable insights. It seems like they're getting disillusioned with all the promises of technology. They're searching for a more human-centered approach to knowledge, to the world.
So instead of just blindly embracing every new technology, we need to pause, ask some critical questions like, what are the consequences? Are we using these tools to make our lives better, or are they actually dehumanizing us, dehumanizing others?
Exactly. The author brings up Hannah Arendt, a political philosopher. She warned about this, about technology overreaching. We need to ground our creations, our technology, in human values. Be mindful of the consequences.
So it's not about just letting the machines decide. We have a choice in how we use technology, how we shape its future.
That's it. And it leads to another point you grapple with, that tension between wanting to connect and the way technology can isolate us. You question whether we're really getting more connected or just more entangled in this vast impersonal network.
Yeah, that's something I think about a lot too, especially with social media. Feeling connected and totally isolated at the same time. It's weird.
It's a paradox, this digital age. You're drawing on this idea that real connection, the kind that matters, it needs more than just sharing information online. It needs real human interaction, empathy, shared experiences in the real world.
This deep dive, it's been incredibly thought-provoking. We've gone from the mind as machine to the very real ethical challenges of AI and big data. And through it all, you're searching for meaning, trying to find balance between the anxieties about technology and a sense of hope. I'm really curious to see where you take us next.
Well, in the final part, you come full circle, back to your own personal journey. You described reaching a breaking point. With all the paranoia, you decide to reject the simulation hypothesis.
That's good to hear. I have to admit, I was starting to get a little caught up in that whole idea myself. It's fascinating, but a little terrifying too.
It's definitely a mind-bending concept, and you explored it thoroughly. But you choose to ground yourself in a more human-centered perspective. You choose to believe in a reality where our choices matter, where human connection has real value. Welcome back to your deep dive. It's really amazing how you pull all these threads together. Technology, religion, consciousness, all connected in this search for meaning, especially in our digital world.
In the last part, you talked about rejecting the simulation hypothesis after really going deep with it. What was it about that idea that hooked you in the first place, and then what made you move away from it?
You describe it as this process, untangling yourself from the paranoia, letting go of those big stories, the ones that try to explain everything.
So it wasn't like a light bulb moment, more like a gradual journey back from the edge.
Yeah, you were really in it, avoiding certain places, wondering if the people around you were even conscious, obsessing over glitches in reality.
Sounds pretty intense. What was the turning point? What helped you break free from all that?
You mentioned this conversation with your mom. It's about a thought experiment. With alphabet cereal, she uses it to argue for intelligent design, saying if the letters randomly spell out a message, it can't be just chance.
I've heard that one. It's a classic argument for, a higher power.
Right, but you push back, saying with infinite possibilities, any combination of letters is bound to happen eventually. But even as you're arguing this, logically something feels off, like true meaning. It needs more than just random chance.
So you're starting to question that purely mechanical view, the idea that it's all just cause and effect, no room for purpose, intention.
Exactly, and that leads you to think about human agency again. Intention. Even in this world where technology is everywhere, we still have choices. We create meaning. We connect with each other.
It's like you're reclaiming your humanity, choosing to engage with the world on your own terms, not just be swept along.
And that feeling gets even stronger when you start reconnecting with the world, with people. You talk about the pandemic, how intense those early days were, how it made everyone realize how fragile life is, how much we need each other.
It makes sense. Those kinds of shared experiences, they can really shake us up, remind us what really matters. When things are uncertain, scary, we need each other. We find meaning in those connections.
You're right, and it highlights something important: human connection, empathy, sharing experiences. It's not just some feel-good thing. It's crucial, especially now, with all the complexities of our digital world.
It's a powerful message. So at the end of this deep dive, what are your final takeaways? What do you want to leave with our listeners?
You come back to Hannah Arendt, her warning about technology, about getting so caught up in it that we lose ourselves. We need to remember our values. Never stop questioning how technology affects us, our lives, the world.
It's a reminder that we have a choice. We're not just passive consumers. We shape how technology is used. We make sure it serves us, not the other way around.
Exactly. And you encourage our listeners to embrace the complexity, not look for easy answers. The human experience is messy, full of joy and challenges. It's a lifelong journey, finding meaning. And it takes curiosity, connection. Never stop exploring.
What a beautiful way to end our deep dive. Thank you for taking us on this journey. And to our listeners, we hope this has sparked some ideas, got you thinking about technology, consciousness, meaning. It's a world that's always changing. And remember, the journey, it's yours to shape.